Okay, good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Reclaiming Your Recall, Memory Supports for Life After Brain Injury. My name is Katie Law, and I am a public education coordinator at the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey. The Alliance is a nonprofit organization with a mission to provide education, awareness, prevention strategies, and advocacy and support for individuals who have been affected by brain injury. Closed captioning is available for this webinar. Look for the closed captioning icon labeled CC at the bottom of the screen. Click the icon to enable closed captioning. Before we get started, I'm excited to share that we will be hosting a webinar series on artificial intelligence and brain injury, what survivors, caregivers, and providers need to know. Join us on June 18th at 12 noon as we kick off the first of a free three-part webinar series exploring how AI can support individuals with brain injury, caregivers, and clinicians through safe, practical, and ethical approaches to emerging technology. You can scan the QR code on your screen or check it out on our website at bianj.org. We also have an exciting upcoming virtual event exploring new paths, complementary therapies after brain injury. This will be held on Tuesday, June 23rd from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Join us virtually for a meaningful morning of learning, exploration, and community, which is designed for survivors and families interested in exploring holistic paths to wellness. You can scan the QR code on your screen, and I will also put the information in the chat. Now, just a few housekeeping notes before we begin the presentation. All attendees' microphones have been muted. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please type them in the Q&A box. We will get to as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. The webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the BIANJ website. At the end of the webinar, a link for a post-webinar survey will be placed in the chat. We value your feedback, and you must complete the survey in order to receive your certificate of attendance. Once you complete the survey, you will receive your certificate via email. Another reminder that closed captioning is available. Look for the closed captioning icon labeled CC at the bottom of the screen. Click the icon to enable closed captioning. I am happy to introduce our speaker for today, Jillian Buccolo. Jillian is an occupational therapist and founder of Community and Home Independence Partners. Since graduating with a Master's of Science in Occupational Therapy from Stockton College in 2011, her primary focus has been on neurological rehabilitation, brain injury recovery, and cognitive therapy. Jillian has maintained the title of Certified Brain Injury Specialist through the Brain Injury Association of America since 2016. She earned an executive certificate in home modification through USC's Leonard Davis School of Gerontology in 2021, preparing her to guide clients in home safety decisions. Additionally, Jillian is certified to deliver LSVT big interventions for treatment of Parkinson's disease, allowing her to support individuals from initial diagnosis throughout their life. Since founding Community and Home Independence Partners in 2023, Jillian has offered mobile in-home occupational therapy services to individuals and caregivers as they age and while they manage the long-term impact of neurological conditions such as TBI, stroke, dementia, and Parkinson's disease. Her main priorities have included improving safety, ensuring clients feel knowledgeable and confidently navigate diagnosis, and improving quality of life for both clients and caregivers, and increasing opportunities to engage in meaningful activities. She's eager to share more about Community and Home Independence Partners' unique services and looks forward to continuing to provide to her local communities throughout Camden, Burlington, and Gloucester counties. I am pleased to welcome Jillian. All right, Jillian, you have the screen.
Thank you, Katie. I am just going to boot up the presentation here. All right. So thank you for having me. As Katie mentioned, I'm Jillian Bacolo. I'm an occupational therapist. I've been working in brain injury since I began my career about 15 years ago. So I'm really excited to be here and talk about reclaiming your recall and talking about memory supports for after brain injury. I remember when I first started working, one of my biggest problems in figuring out how to work on memory was figuring out, like, is this attention? Is this memory? Is this problem solving? Is it communication? So when I was putting it together today, I was like, oh man, I kind of wish I had this guide that would help me with assessment and treatment ideas. So I'm really excited to share this with you today. So the learning objectives are on your screen. So we're going to name the functions of working, semantic, episodic, procedural, and prospective memory. Identify the impact of common challenges experienced after brain injury within the context of daily activities and self management. Explain the role of compensatory strategies and environmental modifications in supporting memory. Apply practical tools and techniques to improve recall and organization in everyday life, and develop personalized approaches for clients or loved ones to enhance cognitive independence. I included a lot of information on these slides so that you're able to use them in your practice. If there's anything, if there's anything on the slides that I don't get to directly address or explain, please feel free to reach out at the end and I'll be happy to connect. My contact information will be on the final slide. So before we get started, I want you to think about your personal definition of the word memory. What comes to mind first when we say memory? A few of you might have jumped right into the medical terminology or the technical definition of the brain's function of memory and the steps of memory. Others might have went to a more basic route of the ability to remember. If you're like many of our clients and their caregivers, you may have thought along the lines of defining a memory and thinking of the things that are meaningful to you that you hold on to. Or you may have been more focused on the sentimental and practical applications of the word memory. So, remembering a loved one's name, recalling what the person on the phone just said to you, following a TV episode by remembering the roles of the characters, and remembering where you put your keys. So, all of these definitions describe memory and its meaning in our lives. It's no wonder that there's so many ways to look at memory because memory plays such a huge role in our day-to-day functioning. Any changes in memory after brain injury are rightfully so very frightening. So in addition to the objectives that I mentioned on the last slide, my focus for the presentation is for each of you to leave feeling confident in your knowledge and ability to support your clients with memory loss after brain injury. I want you to be able to feel confident in being able to provide them with accurate and effective education related to what memory is and does, guiding the selection of therapeutic techniques and strategies, and provide training to improve the client's safety and functioning. Before we get into the brain injuries and their impact on memory, I thought it'd be helpful to do a quick review of the different types of memory. So, in most cases, a person is impacted in various types of memory after brain injury. As a clinician, when I'm assessing someone's current abilities after an injury, I know it's important to check out their skills at each level of memory in order to identify the person's strengths and their areas in need of development. When many people think of a person with memory loss, they have a basic picture of someone who has trouble with immediate or delayed or long term memory. These are typical visions of memory trouble portrayed in media. So if you think of movies like The Bourne Identity or 50 First Dates or Memento, they display glaring examples of difficulties that people experience remembering information from before or after an event. In real life, things are a little bit more hazy. So during today's presentation, I'm going to focus mostly on addressing impairments of working, long-term, and prospective memory. But for the purposes of training our clients, it's really important for you to also understand all of this steps. It's so important to be able to explain memory types and functions to our clients in an approachable way. The more that they can understand about their condition, the more they'll get out of their treatment. One of the things that I wanted to mention is how big of a role attention plays in making memories. I think that's one of the biggest things that I learned as I was working with people with memory troubles. Like I said, I used to feel like I couldn't really distinguish, is it an attention issue? Is it a memory issue? Most of the time, it's both. Um, I'm going to tell you like a totally wild statistic that caught my attention when I was doing some research for the presentation. The researchers at Caltech quantified the speed of human thought at a rate of 10 bits per second. So that sounds pretty impressive. Like that's a lot of information throughout a day. But when you find out that they also found that our body's sensory system gathers data about our environments at a rate of 1 billion bits per second, you realize how hard the mind is working to constantly filter, process, and attend to what's most relevant. So that's how we look at sensory memory. So we're taking it all in. We're taking in the raw experience that we're living. So those billions of bits per second are being filtered out, which is what our brain is seeing to be the most relevant or most attention grabbing information. So according to those numbers I was just saying, we take in trillions or more bits of raw sensory experience a day. Those that grab our attention have the potential to turn into a sensory memory. It would actually be completely impossible to remember even 1% of the information that we're receiving, so the brain makes some pretty heavy executive calls on what to keep. You would recall seeing a man walking down the street with his pants on his head sooner than you would remember the details of any other face on a busy street. That is what's taken in as a sensory memory. It's encoded as a short-term memory. It's stored in your long-term memory for retrieval for when you get home to tell your family about the crazy thing you saw today. The short-term memory and working memory are sometimes used interchangeably, and they're pretty close, but they're not exactly the same. The short-term memory is often a more passive experience where information is being stored while the brain decides what to do with it. And then the working memory is the more active process where the brain's applying the information that it's holding, processing, and manipulating so that it can solve problems and reason to make decisions. Long-term memories can last a few minutes to an entire lifetime. So as you've probably experienced, long-term memories can fade and sometimes need reinforcement. For example, I was watching a movie the other day and I saw an actor on the screen and immediately said, "That's Aunt Julie's husband from Seventh Heaven." I don't know why I knew that or why I remembered that in the moment. It wasn't even close to my favorite show. I've not thought about it for decades. But it could have resurfaced because just that day I had been talking to a friend about Justin Timberlake, who is married to Jessica Biel, who shared that screen with that guy for about 16 episodes, way in the 90s and early 2000s. So somewhere in my mind was that memory, and I was able to retrieve it just from seeing that man's face. Meanwhile, I showed up at the wrong office for my doctor's appointment the day before, so I don't understand the brain. But because of its capacity being virtually unlimited, the duration of long-term memory depends on how it's encoded, its emotional significance, and how often it is recalled. So we're going to focus on 4 types of long-term memory here because it would take forever to explore all of them. But these are the types of memory that my brain injury clients often exhibit. Semantic memory is going to be the recall of factual information. Without really knowing exactly when or where you learned it, it's like deep, long-term memory. Episodic memory is more related to personal experiences and events. Sometimes it's referred to as autobiographical memory or described as being time travel to recall the exact details of a past event or time. Procedural memory is the recalling of how to execute a task, the steps, the tools involved, where to go. Muscle memory is a common term used when describing procedural memory. And perspective memory tells you don't forget to call her back after work, meet at the library at 4, make an appointment for the dentist. It's helping hold on to information so you can adequately and accurately plan and participate in future events and follow up tasks. Perspective planning requires good perspective memory, and there's two types. We've got time-based perspective memory, which is triggered by a point in time, like take your medication at 6 p.m., or event-based perspective memory, which is triggered by an environmental cue. So put the letter in the mailbox when you pass the post office, or tell your husband about the crazy guy with his pants on his head today when he walks in the door. Once you understand the steps of making a memory, you can picture each component. So if there's a problem in any of the phases, you'll have difficulty effectively utilizing the memory. The way that a memory is able to process, retain, and recall information is through encoding, which is bringing in the experience, storage, which is retaining the memory, and retrieval, which is locating the stored information and bringing it back to consciousness. As you can see here, I like to equate the process of memory to the process of using a filing cabinet. It gives a really good visual, and people tend to be able to remember the process when I give them something that they can relate to or that's already familiar with them. So the process of encoding is going to be like creating a document. Whatever the sensory information that you saw, you heard, you felt, you're going to be writing that down and creating a document of that. Placing the document in the correct file in the cabinet is storage, and the retrieval part comes in when you're finding the correct file when you need it. When there's errors at any of those levels, the memory is not able to be used effectively. And this is where attention comes back into play. If the information is not being attended to, it can't possibly be encoded correctly, which means I won't be able to store it properly and forget about retrieving it, because even if I can access the memory, it's likely that it won't be correct because I wasn't attending well enough in the first place, and so on and so forth. It kind of spirals from there. So, understanding and being able to educate our clients and their caregivers on these steps is really necessary for their ability to acknowledge the memory impairment, make accommodations, and succeed in whatever task they're trying to do. When we can figure out where the breakdown is, we can target our treatment more specifically. So just briefly, I'm going to go over the neuroanatomy and how it impacts memory. Um, Obviously, various parts of the brain are responsible for memory, but moderate to severe brain injuries to the temporal and frontal lobes are typically more likely to cause a significant memory impairment. And so here's some information on the structures of the brain and how they support memory processes. It was previously thought that the neocortex was the only part responsible for long-term memory, and that the hippocampus was just for short-term memory, etc. But there's a more multi-systems approach or theory at this time that says like different memories are kind of encoded in different ways, and there's multiple pathways to be able to encode, store, and retrieve a memory. This information was very interesting to me, so I am going to read right from it. One research study showed that up to 50% of traumatic brain injury survivors experience some type of memory and attention impairment. I am going to say that anecdotally, from my experience, that number is probably a lot more. Um, Informal sources report variable and usually higher incidences. So if we're thinking about most or at least half of brain injury survivors are having troubles with memory, I thought it was interesting to pull information from a survey from 2020 that provided insight into the self-report of brain injury survivors. So there, they show that 70% reported struggling to recall personal memories, 65% felt that their relationships had been affected, 85% felt their memory problems had a negative impact on their life, 72% felt that people in their life did not understand their memory problems, and 71% said that they felt unfairly judged or treated as a result of their memory problem. Knowing this information can help us as clinicians keep perspective on why it's important to support brain injury survivors in understanding and managing their memory loss. We want to help ease their burden and promote a better sense of acceptance and well being. And I think it's really important to note and reinforce with our clients that memory impairment does not equal lower intelligence. Memory has nothing to do with intelligence. It's more of the ability to search the brain and pull out the information that we know. And I think that's an important thing to distinguish because that's a challenge for people. So we know that there's a lot of cognitive, physical, mental health challenges faced by brain injury survivors, all unique to the individual. So the impact's going to be different for everybody. Not only can the memory structures themselves become damaged, but other brain injury symptoms can negatively affect the way that the brain processes memory, which further complicates things. So I put a very non exhaustive list of different brain injury symptoms that may in turn impact memory. So reduced attention, emotional dysregulation, decreased sleep quality, they can all impact memory. Impaired judgment may reduce a person's awareness of how important information is that's being shared, and therefore their attention to it may not be as strong as it should be. So when I tell my husband, we need to be out the door at 2 p.m. tomorrow, he may not be listening fully. He just knows we're going somewhere. So when you're working with somebody with brain injury, take a look at their judgment and see how good they feel and you feel their judgment is, which may be impacting how they're taking in information and what they're deciding consciously or subconsciously that's important enough to retain. Communication deficits also play a huge part in memory issues. So, reduced comprehension is going to limit the ease and accuracy of encoding, and that's going to manifest in poor memory. So we know that memory is reliant on attention and energy to be able to process, store, and recall information. When these functions are compromised by an injury to the brain, memory often suffers. So when memory suffers, it can impact other cognitive functions. So you'll see disorientation, confusion, maybe poor safety awareness and problem solving, time management and planning, reduced organization. These are all due to the inability to utilize memories effectively, causing a ripple effect in the daily activities. So, initiation and termination limitations are a huge challenge as related to memory. Sometimes I think it's kind of a chicken or the egg situation, but I find that individuals with worse memory frequently have worse initiation, which appears to them and their caregivers often as lower motivation, which is not the same thing. So, initiation and motivation, not the same. But when they're experiencing that limited initiation, they have a lot of frustration between the clients and the caregivers regarding, how to get up and get moving. And again, if your memory is limited, it's going to limit your initiation to complete tasks, which just creates this cycle. So there's a huge impact of memory impairment on daily life, like missed appointments, misplaced items, misremembering instructions and conversations, which can lead to errors in various parts of your life, limited participation in preferred activities, socialization. And I think the biggest thing that I try to look for first, at least with my clients, is unexpected safety concerns that might arise. So, medication management, medical management, money management. Those IADLs are impacted a lot by memory, and they lead to lost independence when they're having trouble with that. I see it all the time. Medication errors are made frequently due to memory problems. And I think one of my most outstanding memories of practice is of a client that I spent 2 full sessions with planning his Christmas shopping. He was ready to press purchase on his online cart. And luckily, the residential manager stopped us and told us that he already gifted his family over $1,000 to purchase their own gifts that year. Um, he did not remember that, so he was about to kind of put out double, and he was actually really distressed over the situation, thinking that he hadn't gotten gifts and that he was falling behind in his timeline before Christmas. The same gentleman presented me with a very threatening letter from his cell phone company to shut off his phone because he hadn't paid his bill in over 6 months. So he found the letter in his room. He brought it to me and was in a complete panic. He was asking me to help him pay it. But when I checked in with his cognitive therapist, I found out that the bill had already been paid a month before. But finding the paper bill had distressed him and he was thinking he needed to pay it again. So if he was on his own and didn't have those supports, there very well could be some, financial mismanagement in the least and potentially exploitation at the worst. So how do we assess memory deficits after brain injury? I put a couple of specific tools on here. Honestly, in my experience, I use mostly the functional observation and interview and kind of see how they navigate providing their personal history, how they're performing their functional tasks. Are they able to retain information that I tell them in a session and utilize it, following instructions, things like that. But of course, the structured and standardized assessments are supportive too. So you can do some initial screens. The MoCA is a sensitive screening tool that's designed to detect mild cognitive impairment. It heavily tests delayed recall, executive functions, and orientation. The MMSE is a 30-point questionnaire that measures orientation, immediate recall, short term memory, and attention. I highly recommend for almost all of my brain injury survivors a neuropsychological assessment or evaluation. And they use several different scales, but I brought 3 of them for you today. The WMS is the gold standard in evaluating memory function. It has highly specific testing for auditory memory, visual memory, and working memory. The CVLT evaluates how well a person learns and remembers a list of words. And then the CMT is used often for brain injured clients, and it evaluates both recall of information and the patient's self awareness of their own memory deficits, which is really important. Some of the functional daily living assessments include the Rivermead Behavioral Memory Test, designed to predict everyday memory problems using different tasks. Those tasks include remembering an appointment, a short route, or a hidden object. And then the autobiographical memory interview assesses a patient's memory of personal events and facts from their past. I find that it's very helpful to have a caregiver to be able to provide complementary or contradictory information so that you know how valid the person's recall of their information is. So how do we treat the deficits? Like I said, when I was a new student and new grad, it was really tricky for me to figure out, like, was it a memory? Was it attention? Was it communication? But we're going to treat all of it really. I've got some strategies here for you today about evidence-based practice regarding specific memory, including the types that we talked about earlier. But you want to keep a mind on all of the cognitive functions and how they contribute to memory as you're treating. So we're constantly learning new or changing information. We have conversations, encounters, we do research, we attend events, and we're always taking in information. The memory is going to be what helps us retain and grow from that information. The information that we gain is really important to shaping future behavior, and memory of what we learned is necessary for planning, judgment, and decision making for future interaction. So, how do we help our clients? The memory skill recovery is an area that I heavily relied on when I first started practicing because it gets a lot of good buy in. And of course, people find it really motivating to think of recovering their lost skills. And while brain games and challenges are good to keep cognitive stamina sharp and they can translate to learning within the gaming context, there's really limited evidence to support brain training or brain games as a successful approach to improving memory. However, there is some research that indicates processing speed training improves overall cognitive performance. So, like I said, the evidence on brain retraining for memory is mixed, with the most significant findings linked to speed of processing rather than general memory games. Um, while some studies show specific cognitive improvements within the context, others find that these benefits do not easily transfer to everyday life or broader mental abilities. There are systematic reviews on memory rehabilitation that have not found evidence to support or refute the effectiveness of such programs. But still, I think that we can mention that neuroplasticity and strengthening different connections in the brain are effective for various skills. And there's room for skills retraining in some of the evidence based treatment that I'm going to mention in the next slides. So here we're looking at working memory. So while someone's processing information and attempting to manipulate it with the situation, there are a few key strategies that we can support to improve their working memory. So metacognition is a really big topic. I think it's one of the most important things that we can do to support somebody in understanding their deficits. I'm going to get into it a little bit later, but the metacognitive and internal strategy training helps handle incoming information. So you're thinking about your thinking, and it's a great way to develop insight and initiation to use compensatory or adaptive techniques. If you don't realize that you're having trouble, you're not going to initiate to use strategies, or you're not going to change your approach. So here we have strategic chunking, verbal rehearsal, which keeps the information that you need to remember active within the working memory loop and protects it from distraction, increasing the chance that it'll get encoded and stored properly. Elaborative interrogation is a focus on why or how something's happening. So you're connecting new information to long-term knowledge to support encoding. Environmental modification and cognitive offloading are critical compensatory strategies for all levels of memory. And that's something I'm going to review a little bit later in the slides. Treatment of semantic memory is unique and can be complicated by symptoms of aphasia often. It's funny because as an OT, I didn't know the names for a lot of these treatment techniques, but I use them every single day in my practice. So the semantic feature analysis, or SFA, is using descriptive related words to strengthen connections and structures in the brain used for word finding. So if somebody is struggling to name or conceptualize a target item, they are guided to generate related semantic properties. The prompts might include category, function, description, location. And this method forces spreading activation across intact neural nodes, strengthening the overall semantic network map to make the concept easier to access in the future. So again, you're pairing information with other things that you already know and that are deeper within your memory. Intensive semantic memory treatment is when a client is supported in making connections between seemingly unrelated words. This supports brain mapping and stimulation of various areas of the brain in order to better solidify the memory. My favorite way to address this is a game called Pickles to Penguins. I think I got it at Home Goods, so I'm not sure how popular it is, but it's fantastic. I use it all the time, and there's so many ways to play. I've got lots of ways that people, even with severe memory or communication impairments, can use them. The cards have pictures on them, and you have to map a route that connects them, either with other cards or make a story. You're really just trying to get the person to generate communication, to encode some information, and you're looking to pull out that semantic memory. The production effect shows that reading aloud or writing or typing novel information supports deeper encoding. I always tell my patients that the more senses you can use to learn or know something, the easier it will be to remember. This is because you're using various sensory memories being made while carrying over into storage and retrieval. Self-generation is, instead of providing specific words or answer options, we encourage the client to word it in their own way. So they are creating the connection, they are creating the encoding, and hopefully it will be stored more easily for them. We're also going to talk a little bit about errorless learning and the method of vanishing cues, which initially provides the full answer and then lessens the prompts. So, for example, if they're trying to say the word hospital, you would give the full word hospital, and then you would remove the final letters, remove a couple more letters, and see if they can start to piece it together on their own. I think episodic memory for me is one of the more challenging parts of memory to address, just because it has to deal with such personal experience and information. Um, but you can certainly address it. So imagery is probably one of the biggest things. Um, Dual coding is where you're pairing a verbal fact with vivid imagery. So having somebody picture whatever it is they're trying to remember in kind of an outrageous way. So think back to when I said, I'm going to remember the guy with his pants on his head in the crowd, right? That's going to be that vivid imagery. And maybe I want to remember exactly where that was. So it was on Dock Street, and I'm picturing this person on underneath a sign that says Dock Street with this crazy action. And that's helping me to code it twice and try to remember it that way. The production effect, again, is when you're reading out loud, you're writing, you're typing, and that's going to help you encode information a little bit more strongly. And then compensatory environmental aids are going to be those external supports that can help. A lot of people that I work with will take pictures of an event that they were at, and they'll either put it in their calendar or they'll put it on their wall. And that will remind them that they do, in fact, go out and have leisure time in the community, but they're forgetting that they are. And so the picture can kind of bring them back to that moment, can help them relive it in a way so that they can feel more fulfilled. And it is a very supportive memory strategy. So procedural memory, we're looking for high repetition functional ADL training, which is going to be that repetitive performance of specific sequences. And you stay within that sequence over and over. And eventually it becomes a learned process. So it kind of makes up for the gap in procedural memory there. Block practice, where you're doing the same thing over and over, one component of the task, so that you can learn the process and the procedure. Errorless learning is where you're preventing trial and error mistakes to ensure proper encoding. I don't want someone learning how to cook in an unsafe way. So if I allow that trial and error, they may start to learn how to cook in unsafe ways in my absence when I'm not providing them with safety cues. So I want to be able to give them trial and error-less activity so that I can guide it and ensure that they're properly encoding the process. So we do that by forward chaining, where the patient starts only on the first step, and then we jump in and complete the rest until they've got that first step down. Then we expand, they do the first and second step, and so on. Backward chaining is going to be the opposite, where the clinician does all of the steps and the patient finishes. And then once they are able to finish consistently and do that last step consistently, then we back down and provide less and less assistance. Space retrieval training is also helpful. So we can do space retrieval for semantic memory and practice recalling facts or information or words at ever increasing intervals, or we can do it with motor invariant habits. So we can do part of a motor plan, prompting and rehearsing the motor plan, like locking your brakes before standing up from the wheelchair. That's going to be supportive to that carryover that we're looking for, encoding that in the memory and making that part of the habit. And then, of course, task-specific environmental modification. So simplifying engagement so that complex tasks no longer require high demand for recall. So we want to take away the demand for remembering the sequence or remembering the motor plan. We want to give them independence by providing them things like workstations where all of the supplies and checklists are provided for them in the exact order that they have to do them. I do this a lot with grooming, where a person's items are on the counter in the sequence that they're going to use them. Otherwise, the person may forget to shave or they may forget to put toothpaste on their toothbrush. That's going to help with that procedural action with a lack of procedural memory. And also automation. So reducing the demand for the motor relearning is really helpful. So we might do elastic shoelaces, we might do an automated faucet, things like that, where tasks are very much simplified. The environment in which you have to do the task is very much simplified. So it reduces the demand for recall of the way that you need to perform it. We can always adapt and change the way that we approach tasks. And finally, evidence-based treatment for prospective memory. So I find these to be really interesting, and I feel like I use them quite frequently with my higher level individuals who have had brain injuries, especially within IADL context. So implementation intentions is a behavior strategy to improve encoding by linking an action to a specific situation or habit. So it is, instead of having a general intention to do something like, I'm going to call the pharmacy later today, you rehearse. When I pour my morning coffee, I'll call the pharmacy. So when I do this, then I will call the pharmacy. When I sit down for breakfast, I will I'll take my medication. So things like that, where you're pairing two different actions, and also sometimes called habit stacking. Space retrieval training, we talked about before, about physical training, but this is more like using procedural memory to help people recall information over progressively longer intervals of time. So if you need to remember that you need to get a task done later on, you're going to practice it. So what am I doing at 2:00? I'm going to call the pharmacy. In 10 minutes, my clinician might ask me, what are you doing at 2:00? I'm going to call the pharmacy. And you keep practicing with repetition there. Of course, the metacognitive strategy training, we're gonna look at that on the next slide, but that's going to be that thinking about thinking. And then external compensatory aids again. The metacognition, like I said, is the ability to think about your thinking. You're reflecting on your decision making, making adjustments to a plan for a more suitable outcome. So people talk about this meta memory, which is the ability to recognize processes and errors specifically related to memory. And you're looking at somebody's memory self-awareness. If they know what they don't know, or they don't know what they don't know, the tip of the tongue phenomenon. So these are things that we can start training people. When you feel that, here's a strategy that you can get around it. When we can train people to think more about their thinking, like I said, their awareness, hopefully, will improve, and that will allow them to select and utilize compensatory strategies in ways that are supportive to their performance. So in rehabilitation, we're looking at kind of three different areas. We're looking at compensation, adaptation, and remediation. So remediation is the recovering or rebuilding of the lost skill. So like I said earlier, there's not a ton of research that shows that brain training is going to help with that. Although I feel like that is the most commercialized, and like the gamifying of the retraining is exciting for people. So a lot of them will come into the clinic and ask like, "Hey, I heard about this app on my phone. Can I start using that?" It doesn't hurt. But I like to be upfront with people that that is probably going to be the least effective thing that we work on. So I can help them learn how to use the app. But once they've figured that out, we kind of let that be a home exercise program. But mainly in my sessions, I'm working on some remediation and the neuroplasticity and the rebuilding of the memory skills via the treatments that I mentioned earlier. But a lot of times I'm looking at compensation, especially with more severe brain injuries. It's much harder to regain the skills, and it's much more practical to focus on compensating or getting around the deficit or adapting. So changing the environment, changing the task in the way that somebody approaches it. So compensatory strategies can be both internal or self-driven in our mind, or external, which is environmentally driven and reliant on others, tools, or space. Here are some internal compensatory strategies for memory. So mental rehearsal and verbal rehearsal. Those are two strategies that you can use to try to cement information and hold on to it. Visualization, as we talked about earlier. And then there's word related systems. So you can come up with mnemonic devices or rhymes that can help you remember different sequences or different tasks that you need to complete. Acronyms are helpful for recalling sequences. Um, so those kind of internal strategies is where we're focused there. And the external strategies, I kind of separated out for different scenarios. So when you have an upcoming event, keeping a shared calendar with alerts is really helpful. Considering paper versus electronic, what is the previous skill level of the user and what's their current skill level for that? What's their comfort level? A lot of times, if I try to introduce electronic versions of alarms and planners and things like that, I get some resistance because it wasn't a skill that they had before. So, practically, expecting them to learn something brand new on top of learning the memory strategies really isn't going to be very supportive, and it could lead to more frustration than it's worth. So, considering like how did they do these things before, and how can I tweak it so that it fits their needs now. So reviewing the daily and weekly schedule each morning. I know people will do that with a whiteboard, or they'll have their calendar out, or they just have a list on their phone. I find that that is one of the best ways for my clients to remember that I'm coming that day, to remember that they have an appointment tomorrow and it's not today. It's helpful in kind of reorienting to what's going on now and what's coming up. And also planning achievable to-do list to prepare for the week. So I think that that part is important. Having somebody list every single thing that they want to do is going to make the most important things get lost. So simplifying it, making sure that their to-do list is achievable, that's going to be helpful to them. This is really about keeping the event fresh in your mind so that you can avoid losing track of it. This is another strategy that I use often. What you're seeing there, list everywhere on doors, brightly colored, huge. So that's often helpful as a fully external support, right? If you are about to walk out the door and there's a big sign on it that says keys, wallet, phone, I find that that is quite supportive to my clients in remembering the things they need to leave the house with. Sometimes I go as far as to say, put that on your dashboard if they're a driver. That's worked well for us in the past too. So structuring the environment, keeping consistent, sensible storage, putting things where they make sense. Storing your razor in your bedroom is probably not going to be the most helpful to get you to shave in the morning. And then making things visible. Like I said, with the morning routine, laying things out so that they're visible. I know for me, if my medication is put away in the cabinet, I have a harder time remembering to take it versus if it's out on my counter next to my toothbrush, it just becomes part of the routine. And that's that habit stacking. So pairing a time or a place. So habit stacking is really looking at what does somebody currently do? What are their current routines and habits? And how can we get the new thing we need them to do connected to one of those? So for example, again, for me, my medication is pretty fluid, so I don't have to take it at a specific time. So if I take my medication when I brush my teeth, I know I'm brushing my teeth every day. It may not be the same exact time, but it's going to be the same place. So then I do the two things together. For other people, they need to take it at a specific time. So maybe they have like 9 o'clock coffee, and that's going to be their medication time too. So they pair those things together and set that to a time. Um, External aids are going to be written in typed lists. I'm looking at the time and I know we're a little bit limited. So all of this will be in the handouts as well. But a daily schedule, you can use phone reminders, smartphones, Alexa reminders, whiteboards. They're all quite helpful. Finding things at home, like I said, consistent storage and designating a sensible place to keep things. Like I put things in a safe place all the time and I can never find them. But when I put my keys and my wallet in the basket by the front door, I always know where they are. Remembering a conversation, I find, is one of the big things that my clients struggle with. So, a few strategies that have worked really well for them have been asking for a written note or a text or email follow up. So, that can be with family, that could be at a doctor's appointment, something to refer back to so they don't have to encode all of it and work so hard to retrieve it later, especially when it's important information. When possible, be in person and in the same room while talking. It's easier to get distracted if the person you're listening to is not in the same space as you. And then over the phone, ask them for a quick summary at the end that you can write down or use a recording app with their permission. Establishing consistent routines that are easy to keep up with can be really, really helpful tools, procedural and working memory. So, my suggestion is to explore the client's prior habits and routines and their current available and needed supports, and then figure out the problem solving to identify and implement supportive routines for them. Beyond compensation, we can look at task and approach modification. So, using different approaches and tools to succeed despite memory limitations. So we know that there's a memory issue. We're going to work around it by changing the way that we approach the task, maybe by reducing the number of steps or adjusting the time of day that we do it. Or we can modify the environment. This guy's using a not so effective technique, but I'm guilty of it myself. To adjust the environment to better suit someone's needs, you want to reduce the distractions, so visual and auditory distractions. Reducing them will support their attention for the encoding. Arranging the space to support recall, so medication on the counter versus in the cabinet, and then including tools like whiteboards, calendars, clocks, medication reminder boxes. Those types of tools are helpful. The environment that we work in is not always able to be modified. but there's a lot of opportunities to make even tiny changes that can support the attention that's needed for memory. OT, I know I'm biased on this one, but OT is specifically designed to find the easiest, most efficient, and most safe ways to get the job done. And we know that that's not a one size fits all. So, again, these recommendations are general, and I would suggest working with a trained professional to develop individualized lifestyle supports, and improving sleep and reducing stress are very helpful for memory. I think providing education to clients and their caregivers is probably one of the most important things that we can do. So hopefully you gain some knowledge or tools today that you can use to support their understanding. Community safety training. So thinking about the memory outside of the home and what that looks like and making sure that people are safe in all environments. Again, sometimes the caregivers and families need their own support. So including them in the patient education is important, but also considering their needs and supporting them through these changes is really important. As we all know, personalization of treatment is very, very important for max success and being able to effectively manage memory loss. Different treatment options might include occupational therapy, speech therapy, neuropsychology. I mentioned cognitive therapy earlier. That's supportive in other areas. And then one thing to know is that outpatient services can be delivered in the home via telehealth or at a clinic. So if a person can't get out to a clinic, it doesn't mean that their chances for services are like. I included some websites and some resources, and I apologize for going over, but I'm glad that I made it just under the time. If you have any questions in the future, please feel free to reach out. I love talking about this stuff, obviously.
Jillian, thank you so much for that informative presentation. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. There was one question about your background, and I answered that you are an occupational therapist. So I just want to let everyone know you are an occupational therapist. And we will send resources to the person that asked for Central New Jersey. They were looking for a therapist in Central New Jersey. Yes, you will get a copy of all the resources and the slides and a copy, you'll get a recording as well. Please take note in the chat, there is links to our future webinars as well as Creating Pathways Experience virtual event, which will take place on June 22nd. You can also find a link to the survey chat or to the survey for this webinar. Please take a look at that and fill that out. You will receive a certificate of attendance as soon as you complete that. Thank you again, Jillian, for your expertise. We really appreciate it. If you do have any other questions and we did not get to them, you can email me at klaw@bianj.org. And I hope that we will all see you on our artificial intelligence series that's coming up. And this concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much.
Yeah.